Hi, we're Board Game Opinions. I'm Jonathan Hicks.
And I'm Mark Windle.
And we've just finished playing Descent,
Legends of the Dark.
There's been a few
of the Dark.
There's been a few Descent titles over the years.
Yeah.
This is the latest Descent, essentially, which is built on the ideas of the previous one, hasn't it?
Yes, but with integrated app, which
Yes.
they did release an integrated app for Journeys in the Dark
Oh.
towards the end of its lifetime.
Yeah, I remember that, yes.
After Mansions of Madness and before they did one for Imperial Assault.
Yeah,
it was kind of
okay.
part of that. This is the next evolution of the app, or the next stage anyway.
It's very similar in some ways to the Lord of the Rings one. Was that Journeys in Middle-earth?
That sounds like it, yeah.
It's the same people have done the app, essentially. I mean, it's all Fantasy Flight. So if you're familiar with that, it has a lot in common in terms of the app shows you how to lay out the scenario, and you can interact by tapping in like on enemies in the app and things. Obviously, the other thing that it really adds is the 3D terrain,
which this is new.
It is
For pretty much any dungeon crawler I've ever played.
Yeah, the like sort of cardboard trees and things. We've seen that before in things.
Yeah.
But actually having these, I don't know if you can see, but it's like little posts that fit on the side of these tiles. So the tiles come kind of flat, but they have little gaps in the side, and you can stick the posts in and then set them up like this. So you have little levels.
Yeah. No, this isn't a real scenario.
Yes.
Jonathan got to make a diorama, or whatever you want to call it.
So first of all, components. What do we think of the components?
Well, miniature quality wise, I think for pre-built miniatures, so not miniatures you have to glue together, I think these are the best miniatures I've seen in any board game flat. I can't think of anything better. The quality and like the sharpness of the plastic is really strong. The detail's really high.
Yeah.
They've clearly used a different plastic. This is it's less soft, which is why they've been able to add more detail to it. I suspect it also means it's more brittle. I wouldn't go dropping these on the floor because I think they would snap. There's a certain springiness you can feel to them. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, whenever you take them out of the cases that they come in, you're always a bit frightened that you're going to snap, like break the miniature in two when you take it out. We've been very careful and we haven't had any issues at all, but they just feel a little bit more, I don't know.
I wouldn't give them to a younger child to either play with or even get them out of the box. I think these need to actually be looked after. They will break and they will snap. Past that, I mean, the terrain is it's basic in like almost the artwork's not actually that high quality compared to other games. I think
we should mention the artwork because it's going to be a personal thing. But I'm not very keen on this style of artwork. It reminds me a lot of the Banner Saga, the computer game. If you're familiar with that one,
yes.
It's obviously not high detail. It's kind of cartoony, but in a slightly surreal sort of way.
I think people have said to me like Aeon Flux, which isn't something I'm properly aware of, but there's a particular stylized to it, and it is what it is. It's also very jarring that compared to what the rest of the terrain artwork looks like, which is nothing like that. Which is what I was saying is I don't think the actual art on the terrain pieces is particularly high quality. I think it's fair. It's relatively simple in many ways.
It's fine, yeah.
I guess all the board games have to have more detail on the terrain pieces to make up for the fact they're not three-dimensional. But once it's all laid out three-dimensional, it is amazing.
It looks great.
And for me personally, it does add to it.
Yes.
I think the exploration is better. I am winding through a dungeon or going up through a tower and stuff like that, or in a forest because you get quite a lot of trees and stuff. It does work very well. It can be a bit pain to set up as you add the pieces time and time again, but yeah, from a component perspective, it is very, very good.
I really like the dice.
Yeah.
The different kinds of dice affect different things. So some people's weapons, like Bryn's weapon here, is just fairly steady, and the black dice will consistently deliver successes, ultimately for dealing damage. But other dice, like the blue ones or the orange ones, like you have 12-sided, I think, and 8-sided dice. They are potentially capable of getting more successes, but they're a bit more swingy. There's some nice kind of variety with different sorts of dice.
Some are more like to activate special abilities, while others are more consistent on just pure successes, and that's good. It creates variation here. Card quality is fine. Interestingly, it's one because which we'll explain soon. This is one of the few games that comes with card sleeves because you have to be able to flip the essentially with these ones they hold 2 cards in there.
Yeah, so you take them out and there's like 2.
Yeah.
You can see there's 2 cards that go in here, and then you can decide
which side
to
you're
switch
using.
weapons by flipping it over. But you also then get a choice of the weapon. So like this sword, there's 2 different sides with 2 different abilities.
Yeah.
So there's some nice choices there to be made, which is interesting. I've not seen the card sleeves coming with the game before. Which is interesting.
And last guess component, the art in the apps. Yeah, that's similar, pretty much similar to this.
The art is consistent.
Yeah.
Definitely. So the art is very much, as you say in the app, like the art on the characters and things. The other thing that's funny to me though is all the previous art from the Terranoth games, the kind of rune-bound universe, is very different from the art in this. Not
quite cutesy, but more like fun, I guess, would be. This is.
Yeah.
I guess it's more common the style they've used previously, but it is a bit of a change.
You'll know when you see it if you like it or not.
So, what do you think to the rules as a whole?
So I really like the previous Descent games. I've played them quite a bit over the years, and in terms of providing a dungeon crawl experience, I think it does the job very well. The previous version of Descent was really quite rules fiddly. Yes. And one thing they've helped a lot is the app in terms of integrating a lot of the conditions. So one of the things you can do in the app is add modifications to your sword, for example. So you go through and you kill monsters, you get stuff, and you can use the stuff to add a special handle on your sword, for instance. And that might have a 15% crit chance or something, but you don't need to worry about it. Effectively, the app takes it into account. You tell the app how many successes you've got, it deals a certain amount of damage, and every now and then the crit will trigger like you're playing a computer game.
I mean, in many ways you couldn't do that in other games because at a 15% chance wouldn't work.
Yes,
it's got to be done in something behind the scenes computer. Well, before it'd be you might get +1 and whatever. Also, you would be somebody being the previous game managing the overlord, the bad guy, while in this it's everybody versus the app.
Pure co-op, yeah, which I prefer definitely.
Yeah, I think so. I guess when you're playing against the overlord can do more interesting things. Yeah. As in the rules for the monsters are relatively straightforward, which is good. But it does mean you can game them to some extent, and they're kind of predictable. They occasionally do. You'll get the unpredictability is the fact they don't always walk up and hit you. The app, I guess they have a certain 3, 4, 5 different attack patterns or things that they'll do. I don't know. It depends how many. It depends what the monster is, I guess. So they do vary what they do, but that's again based on the app deciding that rather than an overlord going. This one's going to do something different, and this one's going to do something different. You possibly lose a little bit of the tactical fight when you're not playing somebody else, because they cohesively don't come and attack you together. Yeah. Well, an overlord, much as we would try and target weak points like stragglers and stuff like that. We'd be a bit more intelligent what we're doing. Yeah. You lose that level of fight. But I remember the overlord's game being very, very tough in Journeys in the Dark.
Definitely easier playing it as pure co-op against the app. Which is one thing, there is a difficulty setting in this. We played it on standard difficulty, and I would say in general we never really struggled, did we?
No, maybe, I think we most struggled in the early scenarios, but once we got into a flow with more cards and more options and more ways to get rid of fatigue, or drop fatigue, more things so you can spread it around, I think that helped.
One thing I really like in this game is the fatigue system. So in the previous version of Descent, you would take actions and things and gain fatigue, and your character had a sort of maximum fatigue, and once you've hit it, that's it. But in this, it's not a general trait of the character. You're actually placing it on different cards. So you can place it on your character card, on your weapon, on one of your sort of skill ability cards. And the interesting thing is that although you can gradually remove it, if you ever manage to flip one of these over and you decide to put your sword away and get your Warhammer out instead, then you lose all the fatigue off it. And there are various other tokens. You can have negative tokens that have to go on these things, and flipping it gets rid of the negative token. But you might have positive tokens like reroll abilities, and again they have to go on cards, and if the card flips you just lose it. So that's a really interesting decision a lot of the time, trying to manage the fatigue.
I think it needs that system, otherwise it would be very, very walk up and hit things, and it does do a lot anyway. It does need one extra system. Thankfully, also rules wise, we very rarely have to check the book. Once we played one scenario, even returning after playing it for a few weeks, we had to do the slightest checkup on something, and that was it, and then it just flowed. It's really easy to play in that sort of sense. It's certainly not complex, because the app handles a lot of the overhead. Once you've done a scenario, you're pretty much good for it. I can't.
Yeah, it's fine.
As a rule set, it's fine. It's solid. It's easy to learn. It has got interesting variation to some extent to it.
A nice change they made from, again, the previous version of Descent is on your turn you can hit things twice.
Yes.
Previously you could move and you could attack, and that would be this. But in this you get to move, and then you get 2 main actions, both of which could be attack if you wanted. Or if you don't have anything else to do, you can use them to move. So it gives you more freedom. You feel like you're actually doing something useful.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
So the game players, rather than just the rule set, what do you think to the gameplay?
How fun is it?
Yeah, how fun after this. We think we've played 7 scenarios now, so we're approaching the halfway point of the campaign.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of what the game, I suspect, is going to offer us.
So the first couple of scenarios, laying out all the terrain and everything and trying all the new mechanics is really enjoyable. Having played 6 or 7, they don't vary that much. You go to different locations in the app, and you do get different sorts of terrain. And this one's a castle, and this one's through a forest, and what have you. But at the end of the day, most of the time, you're walking up to a monster, rolling some dice, and telling the app how many successes you've got and hitting the thing. It doesn't vary much. Having said that, there's quite a lot of text in the app. There's like backstory and narrative to the events and things. But sometimes it was like there was too much. Yeah,
I agree. I think that's one of my biggest pains. I think you've given me the 2 biggest pains. A, I find it quite monotone in what the gameplay is.
Yes.
I did say it needed this extra system of doing that, because if it wasn't for that, it would be black. I mean, but there would be nothing else other than go and hit this thing, go and hit this thing. Otherwise, there would be no planning at all. It doesn't. Some bookshelves will always pretty much do the same thing. A tree will always do the same thing. A shelf will always do the same thing.
Yeah, because you can interact with these things and basically look at the shelves and see what's on them.
Yeah.
But as Mark says, it's always the same. Like there's 3 typical options, say, for a bookshelf, but every time you hit a bookshelf, it's always the same 3 options.
Yeah.
And you always get pretty much the same kind of stuff from those.
And a lot of the time I felt, ultimately, despite there might be some variation of the scenario, such as one where we were in the woods that had a bit more, had like a second section of the scenario, which was kind of interesting. You are basically just trying to work out what's the best way I get from A to B to hit C, and that can be a little bit dull. We walked into this initially with, when you play the first 2, you go, wow, the things they might be able to do, and 7 scenarios in, wow, the things, I don't know what they could have done, but I wish they'd done something else, because I feel like the scenario we've just played today felt pretty much the same as the scenario I played the first time I played it. And that was fine the first time. On the 7th time, I'm just doing the same thing again in my 20th hour or however long we played into it. You want to finish?
So just to summarise, I do feel it lacks replayability, variability, if you like, in that sense. The previous iteration of Descent definitely had more variety in the nature of the missions and things.
And I also wonder if, again, going back to having an Overlord being more tactical, meant you were at least, to some extent, you're playing a game of chess against somebody else, as in you're trying to outthink somebody. I don't ever feel in this game I'm trying to outthink the app. I just think I'm trying to move through the plot.
Yeah.
So the other one you said with the story, and I agree with that. I to the extent that I don't see how you play this game, if you don't have somebody willing to read out every live text and just sit there with any more than 2 people. And even with 2 people, there are long periods where we're both looking, and then somebody taps, and then somebody taps, and then somebody taps, and then we go somewhere else, and we read a bit, and then somebody taps, and then somebody taps, and it's like you can have 5+ minutes of a wall of
page after page after page of reading.
And I don't mind that in some games, but in this, well, I don't know whether I'm trying to think of like comparisons like Solemn Game, which had a lot of text, but I guess it was a bit sharper and probably a little bit better written. I think you need to have somebody basically reading it.
It didn't keep happening.
No.
I think the thing about this is, like, you'll fight a monster, and then some NPC will wander over, and there'll be a wall of text for you to read.
Yeah.
It's whereas in other games, it's like you'll have a section where we're doing theme to introduce the scenario, and then you'll spend the next half an hour just playing the game effectively, and then maybe there's some text at the end. But this it keeps hitting you with the text.
Well, in the scenarios had with position, there was essentially 2 things we could talk to. We could talk to them 6 times, and they were essentially, well, they're 3 pages of like section of text each. So that was a lot of just sitting there going, and some more text. And it didn't really go anywhere. It was kind of alright. It was adding to the theme, I get, and the talking. I get why it's there. But how would you do it with any more than 2 people? And in many ways, I think this just makes it more suitable for a solo game.
Yes, that's definitely true. I think it would work very well solo, really. And to a certain extent, you might be quite happy with having a lot more theme and text and take the time to read it out. And if your group's happy for one person to animatedly read out all the text, then it's going to be fine. But if you're not keen on reading out text, just be aware there's a lot of it.
Sometimes I felt we were spending 10 minutes reading text between scenarios. Oh, and the other thing between scenarios, the system you're saying about adding bonuses to items is great and all. It can be quite slow and fiddly as it's a nice idea, but we ended just backwards and forwards between the app going, how many stuff we got? Oh, we need to buy some more stuff for this, go back here and buy it. And
there's like a crafting system, isn't there? So you acquire, because every time you kill something you get some stuff, but it like there's loads of different types of stuff and you don't need to keep track of any of it because it's all on the app. So after a while you just stop reading it. It's like you got some baubles and some curios and some metal pieces and who cares what. And then after the scenario you go back to town and you do like a shopping trip where you look through all of your different items. Oh, I can use these items to create this recipe, and I can use these items to build this weapon, and then you equip them on your characters. But it takes a long time to figure out what's the best weapon to make given the money we've got, the resources we've got, and then what's the best character to equip it to, because there's a lot of different characters.
And there might be 20 recipes to go between, and also then you're trying to balance between stuff you might have already had an upgrade on that one, you don't want a second upgrade, and we could spend 30 minutes just doing that. And I didn't find it interesting enough to keep doing. It ended up just being a case of, oh, let's just make sure we fill all the slots. So we've got something on all the slots in each of weapons. And then I'm not sure I could be bothered all the time to keep going, is this a better one than this? Do you know, like A-B checking against
because they didn't make that much difference. They made a little bit of a difference. Like it might be adding a 5% crit chance, for example. Well, that's great, but 5% of the time is really not that much.
But even if it's 25%, 30%, you can't rely on it, and so therefore it's a thing that sometimes is a benefit rather than an actual bonus to your game. You can't plan tactics around it.
No, it just doesn't affect what you do, which is an issue, I think.
I can't. Is there anything else you can think of gameplay-wise?
No, I think we've covered all the key things there.
Do you want to move on to final thoughts? Is there anything else you want to go with?
So what were your final thoughts?
My final thoughts. I thought playing the first story, this could be fantastic. 7 games in, I think it's quite boring. And I think on its own as a set of games, it's fine. I just think the text and the way it's continuing the same, it's just drained all that excitement out of me. And to some extent, it's like, oh, now I've just got to find some more pieces and set up some more terrain. The terrain looks cool once it's set up, but everything feels a faff. The reading feels like the playing a little bit. Or even because you need such a big table and you're having to lean over your terrain to hit the app, and you're like, don't knock down the people and stuff. Everything just in the game. It might be, see, if that's all right if it was one of us, because I could just put it off to the side, a little table, and keep it so it's away from the terrain. But as 2-player, we need to keep it in range of both of us.
Yeah. And
so it then becomes, just try and reach. And it just drains the fun out of something that could be amazing.
And you can stick the app in front.
Yeah.
It sort of obscures the terrain.
Yeah, we put it here, but then I can't see what's going on.
And forwards, maybe, I don't know. But the app is a main feature of the game. Like the map wants to be front and centre, but the app wants to be front and centre as well, and so you're always trying to jostle those two, really.
Do you think it leans too much on the app? Some people, that's what a lot of people. Well, obviously, there's always big discussion of apps and games. Do you think this is the first one getting closer to the point where the app's too central to the game.
There is more stuff happening in the app in this than any other board game I've seen.
There may be U-Boot, which we talked about, but that's a...
Even that, not as much as this?
No, possibly not. And that needs the app.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
it's
it makes
a full-on
the
simulation, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm quite as jaded as Mark is, but I pretty much agree with all of his points. I just think they could have done more, as Mark said. There are more possibilities. There's one scenario I remember we did in the 7 or so that we've had so far that felt quite different in that they used some interesting, without giving any spoilers away, it felt different from like a normal dungeon crawl, move through some things, kill some monsters, get to your final objective. But many of the scenarios do just feel like that, and as Mark says, so much happens in the app, you can almost not care about any of that. So it's hard to become invested. It's a lot, I mean, for good or ill, it's much simpler as dungeon crawls go. So you don't need to worry too much about what you're doing half the time, but I think for both of us, we prefer our games to be heavier. We like to have lots of things to think about. We don't just want a fun story, hit some monsters, get the treasure kind of thing.
Especially when the scenarios can go on 2 hours of that. And
yes.
That's an issue. If there isn't enough game in those 2 hours, then it really starts to drag. The scenarios played, the app said we took 1 hour and 15, and we both thought we'd taken longer. And whether that's the app being wrong or us both thinking, this is dragging just a little bit. And yeah, I don't want it to feel like it's dragging when it's a long campaign.
Most of the scenarios felt too long.
Yeah, I think they need to be a little bit tighter and a little bit shorter.
Yeah, I would have been happy with an hour per scenario, but it's probably more like 1.5 hours per scenario. And we don't hang about, do we?
No, especially there's only 2 of us as well.
Yeah.
I guess one of the elephant in the room is the price.
Oh yeah, my goodness.
So what? I guess in the UK you might be able to find this for 120 to 130 on the discount. You're paying a lot for an app, and I guess you're also probably paying for Fantasy Fight to have a new moulding process with these miniatures.
High quality miniatures is definitely a big part of that.
These have been new, so they probably are covering for the fact that they're trying a new process or have had to invest into it. But it doesn't feel like £130 worth of game.
Yeah, I mean there's quite a lot of cardboard.
Yeah.
Not £130 worth of cardboard.
Also, the art on the cardboard isn't amazing. It works when it's all in together as it is now, but it's got a bit of moss on it. Generally, it's just grey. It's got a few bottles and stuff on it, but it's not the most interesting bookcase you've ever seen. These rocks are all...
It doesn't stand out.
No. Which might be intentional to some extent, so that you don't get lost in all the 3D-ness with the carrot stuff, maybe.
All right, well...
Do you want to give it a rating out of 10?
Oh, I haven't actually thought about my rating. So I think I was probably... After the first play, I was up somewhere around an 8, I think, for it, because you're trying to manage all the new systems and things. As Mark says, by the 6th or 7th play, I think I'm down to a 6.5. And I think most of that comes down to, do I want to carry on playing it? And if I'm honest, probably not. I think there are just a lot of other games I'd rather play than this.
Yeah, for me, I feel like a 5.5 is a little bit too harsh, because I don't think it's actually a bad game. But but if something bores me, I definitely want to play it. So I think I'd give it a 6, because I think if I was playing this as a one-off or a couple of times, I'd quite enjoy playing somebody else's copy. I don't want to play a whole 16 hard scenarios of it though, because that's a lot of hours to pour into something that ultimately just isn't interesting enough to keep my attention. It doesn't. I think you made it right there. There are so many dungeon crawls these days, and so many excellent dungeon crawls. And you can choose a dungeon crawl of the type you want to play. As in, do you want something really heavy and thinky? Get Gloomhaven. If you want something really fun story, get Madara. Or if you want what's it like? We tried that really simple one that you got to. I can't remember. Never remember.
Soul Raiders.
Yeah, if you want something that's heavily story based, quite simple, you can play that. This just doesn't. It's not grating anything.
Yes, and that's a good way of putting it.
And I think there's just better options available.
Yep, absolutely. Well, those have been our opinions. Do let us know in the comments below what you think of it. Have you had a chance to play it? Do you prefer it to us, or do you have similar issues to us? Thanks very much for watching. We will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.